in Roadrash, you had like Sydney. I remember their names, Rhonda the Rash and Sydney.
Oh, yeah.
These were women.
Sydney, yeah.
They were kicking butt, like punching grannies, like throwing chains around, just the
Kicking
same
cops.
as Axel and like Slim Jim. You and I both know that you don't need a specific discipline to be a game designer. In fact, you shouldn't be overly streamlined.
Where is the place that you drew the line, and how did you find the balance for something like that?
Diversity, inclusivity, accessibility, they can't be afterthoughts. They have to be on the table as constraints when you start designing.
Do you feel that stereotypes can be done right? Because I am one of those people who think that stereotypes are necessary, but they need to be done right.
These are relatable Indian stereotypes. It's funny because it's true.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Humans of GameDev podcast. I am your host Karan Ganesh.
And I'm his co-host, Akshay.
And we're very excited because we have a guest joining us on our show finally. We wanted to introduce Bhamini Lakshminarayan, who is the co-founder and the head of design at Bigfatphoenix Interactive. Thanks for joining us, Bhamini, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for saying my name right. It's great to speak to other people who can say my name.
We're very lucky to have you on the show. Firstly, we wanted to congratulate you on the launch of Makkal in Mudalvar. Akshay and I both got a chance to play the game and we were super impressed. We have a lot of questions for you, which we will get to later. But I think the start of this, we wanted to go all the way back to your journey. So while we were doing the research for this episode, we saw that you are currently a co-founder, you have your own studio, but before this, you also worked at Byju's in collaboration with Disney, and then you worked at a studio called QMath. And your background was started in economics with your undergrad and then eventually went on to media and culture studies. What led to eventually getting into game design as a career?
Well, I think all of us who make games, we have really happy childhood memories making games. And at some level, we don't want to grow up. So at least that's part of my story, because the joy of being in the space with video games, you can't find it anywhere else. And the older I got, the more I realized this was the space I wanted to be in. I did study economics. But while I was doing that, and I was at St. Stephen's, it's supposed to be one of the best colleges in India for economics. While I was there, I realized that I wanted to do meaningful things. I did economics because I wanted to work at the UN or work somewhere that, made policy. But while I was there, I realized that I could play to my strengths and create things that could give you that joy while making a difference. Or at least that's the hope. So that's how I found my way to games.
That's awesome. And I think just having such a rich and varied background, has that helped you shape the way you've thought about design, or the way you even approach the design for making your games?
Oh, absolutely. You and I both know that you don't need a specific discipline to be a game designer. In fact, you shouldn't be overly streamlined in the way that you study, because excellence happens at the intersections of all of your interests and all of your skills, especially when games are built by multidisciplinary, multi-talented teams. It helps that you can bring as much as you can to the table.
That's a really great point that you brought out. And the reason that we're also trying to do a lot of this is that the three of us on this call, we come from very different backgrounds. We started off very differently, and our approach into games was very different. One of the things that we're trying to promote with this is also that there is no set and steady path to get into making video games. Following that, I think another question that we had is, when you started off, how did you convince your parents, and what was that story like? Did they say, okay, you can just go do this as a career? Because Akshay and I have been brainstorming about this, and we're like, okay, we had our own stories, but we'd love to hear yours.
It's a tough sell sometimes, right? Luckily, I was very fortunate because I have an older sister who worked briefly at Singer. She's a full-time writer. She's been doing that for the last 5 or 6 years. But she did that heavy lifting for me. So many years before I came of age to work in the games industry, she went in there and took all those hits. So I just casually breezed in and rode on her hard work. At least with my parents. I would say only with my parents. I would like to take credit for my other work.
I think this is like a general thing when it comes to second bonds. Like, I'm a second born at home. And I still
So am I,
remember
yeah.
after I pitched my idea. Yeah, I think this is a second child gang which is happening here. But when I pitched these ideas to my parents saying that, hey, I want to work in games and all that, my dad was a little bit skeptical. My mom did not care. She was like, do whatever you want. As long as you're making money and happy in life, I don't care. My brother was one of those people who was like, Pops, if he wants to go do games, like you got to start doing your research and all that. And he kind of stood up for me probably at the right moment, which kind of helped me, like get into games properly. And I think that's kind of like amazing, like having elder siblings who are willing to stand up for what you believe in it's like great. So that's something
Yeah.
super relatable when he said, yeah, I have an older sister who was already in Zynga. And I was like, sounds pretty much like my story. But yeah.
I
Older
totally echo that
siblings.
second child one as well. For me, my elder sister took up a very different course. She pursued it, and then when it was my turn, my parents were like, "Okay, you can go and explore what you want." So, definitely echo that second child advantage that we have here. So,
Child advantage. Second one buff.
Yeah, really.
I have one tiny question. Like you talked about how games kind of inspired you a lot as a kid. So all of us had this one game which kind of like changed the way how we looked at games. Like it was something that became your cornerstone for which you are like you started thinking about, oh yeah, I kind of want to go do games. For me, I think it was more like I did play a lot of Prince of Persia, the trilogy games, the initial, the good ones, and then a lot of Halo 3. And I think Halo 3 was like my changing moment. But yeah, like what was yours, Bhamini? Like what was your like pivotal moment in games, the game which changed your views about games?
Well, honestly, first of all, I'm old enough to remember when Prince of Persia OG came out. When I was playing
Wait,
it on
Prince
my
of Persia
Windows
3D
95.
or
I
the
was playing it on
2D?
a Windows 95.
Ah,
So
okay, wow.
okay.
let's just leave it there and not talk about how old I am. We used to get games as demos that on CDs that came free with this magazine called Digit, and that's how we
Mhm.
got all our early PC games back in the day. So anything you saw inspired you because there was no other way you could get it. Aladdin, Lion King, those games. I've never played past level 2 because they were only demos. But man, I played those 2 levels so much.
Oh, this is so related. I think the whole of Windows 98 and I came with like Claw, if I'm right, like the whole game of Claw, which is
Oh,
like
what a pain.
Yeah.
not a lot of people know it. But Claw is by Monolith, and not a lot of people know that Monolith made Claw. And I'm just like, what? When I got to know it, and yeah, I totally relate to that. Yeah, I got demos, and demos were the only thing which I played a lot during my younger years.
Yeah.
Such a good platformer, right?
Yeah. But as an adult, the moment I realized I wanted to make games, it was when I played 80 Days by Inkle. Meg Giant writes for it. It's this fantastic. And it's just text and a simple art. So that is the moment I realized games could take so many different shapes and forms, and I could see myself fitting into the medium.
That's actually a very great way that you put it in. And just jumping into your studio and like the mission, vision, and mainly the name. Like, how did that come up, and what was that conversation like?
So actually, Bigfatphoenix was the Twitter handle of one of the co-founders a decade or so ago. Anand Ramchandran, he's very well established in the Indian games ecosystem. He's one of the co-founders of the company, and I've learned a lot from him. So Big Fat Phoenix was his handle about 10 years ago. And when he pitched it to us, all I could think was, Phoenixes are in Harry Potter. I will say yes to Phoenix. So I'm a simple person like that. I let entertainment dictate my choices.
Just based on my research, Fairside Studios was one of the projects that I came across. You designed it for children between the ages of 7 to 12. I think the bigger question that we have is when you take an approach for something that's educational, and entertainment. Where do you draw the line for balance? Because you can't get too much into the idea of making a game too entertaining for a child, and then that way the parents or people won't target too much towards it. Or if you make it too educational, the child might not enjoy it. Where is the place that you drew the line, and how did you find the balance for something like that?
So that's an interesting question, and I have a bit of an answer. Fairside Stories is narrative-led games for kids. It has RPG-style elements, strategic decision-making, turn-based combat, and choices that determine the way that your story goes. Right? We don't think that we're making educational games. We think all games at their heart are meaningful and they make you think. I think there's a false distinction that as game designers or people in games we tend to make, where we think of things as either entertainment or we think about things as, I don't know, social messaging, as people say. But all entertainment that you consume shapes the way that you look at the world. I mean, I grew up watching Friends. So until I was in my teens, I never thought about diversity because everyone on Friends was white. I just thought, like, okay, this is what America looks like. It's not what America looks like. At the same time, I played Roadrash. Roadrash was a pivotal game for me growing up. And,
I think all of us for
right?
sure can agree.
I think I started off with Roadrash when I was 6 or maybe 5. God, it used
What a
to I still haven't
fantastic
visited Napa Valley, even though I'm like Cali.
You must go. But
Yeah.
in Roadrash, you had like Sydney. I remember their names, Rhonda the Rash and Sydney.
Oh, yeah.
These were women.
Sydney, yeah.
They were kicking butt, like punching grannies, like throwing chains around, just the
Kicking
same
cops.
as Axel and like Slim Jim, right? Is it John or Jim? So these are games where women were doing anything they wanted to do, perhaps things they shouldn't do, but it kind of constructs this space where you start seeing the world a certain way. So all games are inherently always telling you things about the world. All entertainment really is. So all that we do in the games that we make is we kind of float it up a little bit more. We're a little more conscious about it while we're designing. Games give you the space to play with things, experiment, basically mess around. And that's how we find the space that we put our games in. Because I believe that all games give you the space to try things, learn, pick yourself up, try again. And if it happens to be more conscious about it, that's just one type of game. If it's extremely learning focused and curriculum focused, that's a completely different experience that usually tends to be more interactive learning with play. But games can take all shapes. So this is our studio just makes one kind.
Your idea about play and stuff reminds me about Bogos. I think Ian Bogos. But yeah, he talks about play and all that stuff in one of his talks. And yeah, and he's one of those people who have been constantly quoted at the game center, the school which I went to. And we kind of go through his stuff a lot. And it kind of reminds me of that, especially when you said that games need to have some kind of play. Like, what do you call play? Something that has, some little kind of like loose connections which allow you to like move things around. And that's why you say you play video games or you play sports, because there are tight constraints, but then again, within those constraints, you're still able to do a lot of things. And it it took me to that, which I find to be super cool.
I'm very flattered because Ian Bogost is one of the people I really admire. I love his work. And in fact, I find he argues about procedural rhetoric. He says that the actions you are allowed to do inside a game, they basically tell you how the world is, or at least they tell you how the game world is. Okay. And that is a reflection of society. So that's something that, at a theoretical layer, is something that I'm conscious of when designing games myself. So thank you for bringing him up. I enjoy talking about his work.
Oh, I just love that man. He's such a good designer. I'm just like him and Ian Schreiber, I guess, the one who does systems and game balance. these guys are just like, they are so good.
And we just stand on the shoulders of giants.
Oh yeah, totally.
I think there was one great point that you brought up about diversity, and then while growing up, you saw Friends, and then I think that's pretty much like I used to grow up watching shows which were based in America as well. While approaching an idea towards like designing a game, how much of the diversity aspect started influencing, and did that also help you drive different design decisions, making a game that was inclusive for all? How you would represent it, or was it represented in a way that you wanted it to be, or what was some of the changes that you tried to bring to that?
So I'm glad you asked that, because it just means our industry is maturing, because we actually are having so many conversations these days about diversity and inclusivity, right? And accessibility, really important as well. The way I think about things is diversity, inclusivity, accessibility, they can't be afterthoughts. They have to be on the table as constraints when you start design. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to add them in as a touch point later on. Because if you're not thinking of these things at the start, you're going to have systems you just need to read. That's from like an execution point of view. But also, you're not going to be designing your games for as many people as they can reach. It's not just from an ethical standpoint, but from a pure business standpoint, diversity works because you're just going to reach more people. I always like to think about what is the kind of game I would like to play. And then I work those elements into the kinds of games that I want to play. And when I play a game, I want to see people like me. And that puts me at an advantage already, because that means it's likely that I will have some kind of ethnic and female where kids of all kinds could see themselves. Of course, you can't represent the entire gamut of human experience, but you can try and represent a range. So we have different ethnicities: Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, genders, of course, sexualities. We have a non-binary character, um, physical types. We have a little person. We have a girl in a chair. We wanted to try and create as much diversity as we could, because I wanted kids to feel seen. And I also wanted to be very conscious about the fact that I can only speak to a couple of these experiences. So we created sensitivity panels of folks who had experiences, or folks who were like the characters in our games. We got in touch with them and we got them to really work with us on changes we needed to make. Janaki, the Indian character, lost her bindi because it was too upper caste Hindu, and that was excluding some people who couldn't relate to her. We had Maria, a Spanish character, a Mexican character who was speaking European Spanish until it was pointed out to us. And then we had to correct it first to Mexican Spanish. Note to all designers, don't rely on Google Translate. So you don't have to get it right in your studio, and you don't have to get it right as one person. You won't. You need to be open to listening to people. You need to actively go out and ask people, and be humble enough to accept take their word for it and make changes. So I think that's the best advice I can give to anyone who wants to incorporate diversity.
What you just said is like the core of playtesting as well. When you think about it, it's like, yeah, you need to throw a game out there for people to react to it, and then you collect feedback on it. And I think, as you're saying, it kind of applies to a larger system like a studio as well. Now that you mentioned it, like, it's super interesting how something that your product is also could end up becoming your whole studio as well. Like it applies to something that is your product and your studio. And yeah,
we are a bunch of people who have very deep-rooted beliefs, and somehow they seem to permeate into everything. So, I mean, I'm fortunate that I've been able to create this space where other people feel similarly. We should all be as lucky.
a question which I have. So when you think about it, like I see a lot of things which we look at as stereotypes, and we kind of look like we generally attach a negative connotation to stereotypes, right? But do you feel that stereotypes can be done right? Because I am one of those people who think that stereotypes are necessary, but they need to be done right. Not kind of like, okay, this is a very personal view. I'm just putting it out here. There is like, Indian representation will just drop a Kali skin and say, yeah, cool, right? Or just have a character who supposedly has Indian origins. And yeah, they're there and they're a healer or whatever. And I feel those are the badly done stereotypes. Whereas there are other stereotypes which are stereotypes, but you kind of like it. For example, this is like a huge stereotype which Disney did with Phineas and Ferb, which is Baljit. But somehow you don't get offended by Baljit. It's probably because it's a kids show or something. But then again, there is this offense which you take from a stereotype, and there are certain stereotypes when done right are funny or acceptable, or it's like poking fun at the fact that they're using a generic stereotype to make fun of like stereotypes being used. So what's your viewpoint on that? I'd like that would be super interesting now to know like what you're thinking.
That's a great point and a great question. I actually agree with you that I think that stereotyping has its uses, definitely, as a device in creating narratives and just being relatable. They can be really funny. It depends on the perspective you're taking when you're making those stereotypes. Like you said, are you poking fun at the existence of the stereotype? Is it meta? Like Token in South Park, right? He's the token black character called Token because they're very self aware about how white their show is. So is it meta? I don't agree with a lot of South Park things, but I do enjoy that portrayal. Just putting it out there. But, you know, are you meta aware of what's going on? Are you using stereotypes to their advantage or are you using them cruelly? Because I don't think we are offended by Baljit because there's nothing cruel about his stereotype. It's not, oh, look, he's an Indian, therefore he lacks social skills. I'm looking at Big Bang Theory here. Oh, he's an Indian. I mean, I can get, you don't want to go too deep into trying to deconstruct these kinds of TV shows, but they do build stereotypes in people's minds when they keep watching it and they're continuously told, oh, this is what Indians are like, or this is what techie people are like, right? So I think particularly when you work with children's media, games, Fairside Stories, are for 7 to 12-year-olds. You need to know how to use some strengths of stereotypes because kids also respond to things that are relatable that they can quickly understand. Actually, that's true of games at any age group. You need to have certain triggers for people to be able to immediately understand characteristics of the kind of person that they're interacting with, the kind of character they're interacting with. But you don't need to have fakir music playing in the background, snake charmer like music playing in the background. I'm looking at Carmen San Diego now, so there are elegant ways to do these things. I actually loved different medium, but as I loved Pavitr Prabhakar in
Prabhakar,
the
yes.
new Spider-Man.
Absolutely well read.
Into the Spider-Verse.
Across the Spider-Verse.
Across the Spider-Verse. Sorry.
Yeah, across the Spider-Verse, yeah.
So it's a great stereotype. Of course, he's like this kid in Bombay, and of course he's trying to like fall in love with his like girlfriend and save his the father doesn't approve it. Dude,
Yeah.
these are relatable Indian stereotypes. It's funny because it's true. It was clearly written by someone who is probably from backgrounds and experiences like ours.
I mean, I honestly related to the whole thing, like where he talks about chai tea, and I'm just like, yeah, don't call it chai tea, guys, because I've been to stores like before my classes, and they'd have chai tea right there, and it used to trigger me in a way. And it also wasn't shy because it was just cinnamon. And I'm like, guys, don't even call it tea. But I totally related to that. And also, I kind of like the comics. I read the comics when I was in like fifth or sixth grade. Uh, I think it was called Spider-Man India or something. It got a little bit of popularity for a short time, and then it died. But I feel the comics also got certain stereotypes right, but it kind of did feel like a typical stereotype of what an Indian would be, the comic. But as you were saying, Across the Spider-Verse had such a good representation. It's like it was really nice and it was super relatable in a lot of ways.
And refreshing to see that they had done it well after a long time of being very stereotyped in most situations. We're going to get into the topic right now, which you wanted to talk about, which is Makkal and Mudalwar. Firstly, again, congratulations on the launch of that. Akshay and I, we got a chance to play it over the weekend. And I must say, I was really happy, firstly, that we have a game from Tamil Nadu, which is coming out. And then we were able to get more perspectives. The biggest question I had about that was while designing this, what was the target audience in mind, and how did that influence your design decisions? Because for me, when I started playing the game, the onboarding was much more easier. It gave me a much more easier way to get into the game, to understand the game, and to continue playing through the loop, which is beautiful. But when designing it from your side, who was the target audience intended to play this game?
So the chunk of design credit really goes to Bhavna Padmanabhan, who she directed the game. I only directed the narrative for it. So hats off to her, Pavitra Sridhar, and Ramchandran. They've done incredible work on this. But to answer your question, the target audience for this was the layperson in Tamil Nadu who is interested, who enjoys reading because it is a very text-heavy game, and who just wants to learn more, or someone who just wants to play around. The game is not meant for erudite, technically sound, academic kids who want to dive deep into the concept, it's also not made for people who only want to play Call of Duty. And that's the thing, right? Your games, you're not going to get everyone with your games, and that's okay. The people your games are going to reach, some of them might find it really meaningful. And that's what counts when you're making games. You don't want to hit the 1 billion audience, because if you hit the 1 billion audience, you're making a really generic game. You're making Teen or you're making Ludo. That's fine. That's one style of game. It's not the kind of game that I typically find myself drawn towards design. So we wanted to make an accessible, friendly game which takes on some really heavy topics. It is a political strategy game which gets players to act as the chief minister, the leader of the state of Tamil Nadu in South India. So in this role, players are expected to balance these very measurable metrics like the economy and healthcare and, the way that business is functioning and employment against the deeper, more difficult issues to deal with, honestly, like social justice, women's empowerment, and equality. And it's the tension between these things is there in every society. It's there in India. It's very much here in the United States as well. So we're taking these really weighty issues, and we're trying to make a game out of it. So we knew that it had to be accessible. And I knew that the tone I wanted for the game was light, easy reading, and slightly tongue-in-cheek humorous at times. Because if you want people to just read information and facts, they can just go read the newspaper. That's not a game.
So as someone who sat down to play the game, I could instantly see the choices which would actually positively impact and choices which will probably negatively impact the whole thing. So even though the whole core loop was strong, where it was like, oh yeah, this feels like that, I do this, and then you have the other randomized thing where you drag and drop. So all those things were happening. I started noticing how there was almost a 1:1 relation going on. Do you feel that, like, as someone who has done economics, someone who understands systems, because I kind of relate and understand systems in the world in general through physics and economics. I just want to understand, like, was there a very specific reason why you wanted to dumb it down to that point, or is it like right now we are just doing an initial vertical slice of the whole game, but we are looking to build it into something that's a lot more strategic and a lot more decision heavy.
Okay, so if I can paraphrase then your question, if I understood it correctly, it's was there a conscious reasoning behind the simplicity of the mechanics you chose in the game and the simplicity in which the narrative evolved, rather than the complexity that some larger strategic games like Age of Empires or Civ 6 give players? Um, was that a strategic decision? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like I personally feel there's so much of strategic decision making that has been just left on the table, which hasn't been tapped into. And your
So,
narrative is strongly driving your choices, then your, like your meters, right? Like your numbers. So, is there a reason why you kind of chose that path?
so it is a good question because at every point when you're doing design, you want your decisions to be conscious. There will always be things that you don't include in your game because it's a conscious decision to have constraints on your game and to go after specific pillars that you are defining. What is that ultimate intended experience you want for players? And how do I get there? If getting there does not involve some of the mechanics that you could add into the game, don't add them. Is one approach that you can take because it keeps things simple. Now, was simplicity a conscious choice? Yes, because this game was made in collaboration with Populous Engagement Network, which is a think tank in Tamil Nadu. And they really want to raise engagement from young voters, first time voters, people who wouldn't otherwise be thinking about politics. So, for them, what was important was we want players to be able to walk away from this game with an understanding of how politics works, just at a larger level, how it works, and how the political ethos of this particular state in India really functions. So, what is that political history? What is that political background? They wanted it to really they wanted to communicate it. What did we want? We wanted to give players an opportunity where their choices affected what happened in this world and that they had a goal that they needed to reach in order to win. A lot of the choices that you make along the way to support these pillars, they might differ from design team to design team. For instance, to achieve this goal, it was not necessary perhaps to have opposition come in aside from those chance cards that you got at the end of each level. There are those options for randomization. So perhaps it was not necessary to do that because it didn't lean as heavily into the intended goals. And those are just design decisions you make on the cutting table. At the end of the day, if we add all of the levers that a game like Civ 6 makes, it will be a great game. But why bother making the game? This is a different kind of game intended with a different outcome for a different audience. So you always have to design with those things.
And when I started playing it, one of the first things which I felt was it feels a lot like a tabletop game. So did you guys actually make a tabletop prototype and then go ahead and make a digital one?
So when I design, it's always prototype heavy, and I love a paper prototype because I think that you should make things as dirty and as low fidelity and as basic as you can because only the good ideas will survive. So yeah, there's definitely prototyping that we did at the start. We never, when we're doing these things, we have thus far not gone to the point where we indulge ourselves by creating high fidelity tabletop games. These are prototypes. So they're going to be at a basic functional level. But in any design flow that I'm a being said, if it's an FPS, role play it. You will always be able to find a cheaper way to do things than investing a whole dev team's effort on building out a digital experience, unless it's a really light experience, right? If you want to do a simulation, there are multiple ways to prototype that are low-fi, low-cost, and fast. So I'm a big proponent of, especially since we have our own studio, time and money are very finite resources. So the faster your idea can be tested, the faster it can fail, the faster it can evolve.
Just getting into probably the last segment of the episode, which you wanted to cover, is you've been in the industry for a very long time. You had some amazing experience. For somebody who's new and looking to join, what is something that you would give your guidance on, or where do you think somebody should start to even approach their journey into the industry?
So I've been around for about a decade, and in this time I've learned a couple of things. One is you just have to play everything. You can't limit yourself to saying, I only play this kind of game. If you want to be in games, play everything. You don't have to like every game, but you do have to play it because you'll never know where your next mechanic will be. You don't know what what will inspire is the next thing that you do. And this is regardless of what kind of department you're going to be in, whether you're a designer, producer, dev, doesn't matter. Play everything. The second thing is start building. Like we were just talking about prototypes. You don't need a huge team. You don't need coding skills to start building things. And I'm not saying this for a quote unquote portfolio. I'm saying this so that you start learning what you enjoy how to do. Because the more you do it, also the better you will get at it. So maybe you realize I only want to be building FPSs. Or you realize that I want to be making dating sims. The more you make, the faster you learn. And the third thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to people. The fact is that our industry tends to be closed to people who know people who know people who know people. That's just the difficulty of a creative industry because people need to come vouched for because it's hard to get a start. So just reach out to people. Most people are inherently kind and they're happy to give you some of their time to help you out because somebody did it for them back in the day. So those would be 3 tips to someone who's just at the start of their career.
Closely knit part. I've heard that from a lot of people, and I think yes, you need to be able to you should be able to open it, speaking up and then bringing forward your thing, so that way at least you're able to connect with more people. And you're right, there were people who gave me their time in understanding how this works, what I should do or what I'm doing wrong, and I was able to correct some of that. And yeah, it's just that now whoever asks, I'm able to give them my time to make sure that they're going in the right path. So definitely resonate with that. And I think the next question that I had is you're an Indian woman who's working in the games industry right now. What has that experience been like? And can you tell people, like, because we see that the diversity part is growing finally in the industry, which is a great direction to head towards. And how's that experience been for you? And what's something that you would want to see get better?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's never easy to be someone who stands out from the crowd on a team. It is fun though, because your opinions will stand out. As a woman in games in India, there is a challenge because we started this call talking about stereotypes, right? There is very much that stereotype of who a game designer is, what they look like, the kinds of games that they play, the kinds of games that they make. There's a lot of people who look down on folks who make a hyper casual game instead of working on a AAA FPS. There are a lot of stereotypes about what a game designer is, or what a person in games is, and what they should aspire to be doing. As a woman in games, you will find yourself questioning yourself a lot based on these things. I think it happens to anyone in games, more so if you're a minority anywhere. You will always be a minority, unfortunately, in India as a woman in games right now. And in the United States, I'm sure that you've experienced it yourself as an Indian game designer. Right? You will be on a minority in a larger team. So you just need to believe in yourself. And the best way to do that is to look for people who've done what you want to do already and know that if they've done it, you can do it too. So I appreciate this podcast because I'm assuming that people will be able to have access to it and see people on it and think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. So I think that's an incredible thing that you're doing to kind of make the industry grow and mature. And yeah, it's on its way to progress. It's on its way to diversity. It has some ways to go.
Perfect. That's the best way you can put it. And like you said, I think the reason for me also starting this is that growing up, I don't think I really was able to see somebody like me who was in the industry. And also, I did not know much about this. The awareness part was much lesser than it is right now. People are more aware that this is a career, this is a field they can get into. But when we started off, I had to do all the research on my own. I had to understand if this was viable, and I had to convince my parents as well, saying that, okay, I want to do this. But then now it's gotten so much better, and then we're trying to spread the message in a better way to more people, saying that there is no set path to getting into games, and there are so many people who are now doing this as a career. And if this is something that you're interested in, here's what people have done so far. But again, thank you so much for the advice. I'm really positive that it'll help out so many people. And I think next steps for you. Do you have a new game coming up? Do you want to give us an insight about that?
No, actually, it's pretty close to being coming out soon. I worked with Cincinnati Zoo on a game that's a dungeon crawler in which you kick some butt with real-time combat and you save some elephants. Because Cincinnati Zoo works with people in areas of high human-elephant conflict. And you reach a wall when you're trying to convince people to, not be jerks or to fall in love with elephants. You can't preach at them and yell at them and get them to fall in love with elephants. You can't make them do anything. But if you give them a game, you're giving them an enjoyable way to experience that idea. So that's what we worked on. It should be coming out soon by the end of the month. It's Harmony, Heroes of Elephantia is the name that we'll be going with. And we're really proud of it because it's, I think, it is the first dungeon crawler that we made. It's minimally text heavy. We tend to be very narrative focused. This is still narrative driven because, hey, I'm around. But I think you'll enjoy it. I'd love to hear your feedback. And depending on the timeline that this podcast goes out, feedback from anyone and everyone else. Because I'd love it.
Congratulations and wishing you all the best for that. We wanted to thank you so much for your time.
No. It's just my pleasure. It's been lovely talking to you guys. It's great sharing experiences that we have in common and experiences that we have different. And I wish you guys the best. I love the concept of your podcast and I'm excited to keep listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I'm your host, Karan, and joining me is my co-host, Akshay, and we will see you guys in the next episode.